G'day guys, Christari here. Today I'm going to go through which dynasty from the last 20 years is the greatest of the recent AFL dynasties. So, is it Brisbane's three-peat team under Lee Matthews? Is it that great Geelong team under Mark Bomber Thompson? Could it be Hawthorn's three-peat team? Or could it possibly even be the recent Richmond team that we've seen that's won the three premierships in the 4 years? Let's have a look. Okay, so to go through the teams, so I've just gone in sequence in terms of the years, of course, that the dynasties occurred. So starting off with Brisbane, so they were the first of the big four teams, I guess you could say, from this past 20-year period. So what I've done here, I've formulated firstly a best 22 and then a few emergencies just to give people a bit of a reminder of some of the great players of those times. So I've listed off all of the All-Australians. So in terms of the total number of times or instances that a player during this 4-year period made the All-Australian team. So that Brisbane team, we had 18 times. They won the three premierships, of course. So that was in the first 3 years of that period. And then, of course, they made the grand final in that last year. So the 2014 when they lost to Port Adelaide. In terms of home and away wins, so we've got the results here. So second most, third most, second most. So during the home and away season, they were never quite the dominant team, but of course they were always right there with them and always that top four team during that period. So we've got total number of wins, we've got the home and away percentages, and we've got the average percentage. So for me, average percentage has always been the best indicator of team strength. So for me, this plays a key part and as a key sort of component in comparing these teams to show how dominant they were during their respective times. But to go through certainly some of my favourites from that Brisbane team, well, you've got some incredible names. So in the forward line, having Lynch, Bradshaw and Brown, that's incredible. With Brown, though, the important thing to note is he wasn't nearly near his prime. So he was playing reasonable football, but he was in his absolute infancy. So it was really in the years following on from this Brisbane dynasty that Brown became the great player that he became. But the other interesting component is, well, you've got the total spine. So you've got Mel Michael, you've got Justin Leppage, phenomenal key position players. So competitive with any of those key position groups. But then you've also got one of the most fantastic midfields ever. So you've got Voss, you've got Black, you've got Ackermanis who went through there but also was incredible forward. You've got Lappin who was incredible, Power. So you've got some great names. Very solid defence when you've got the likes of Chris Johnson back there as well. So really good team. And then we go through Geelong. So for me, this is one of my favourite teams of all time in terms of how they were constructed. And what I really enjoyed with Geelong was actually their defence and how well they really worked as a unit, where they were really one of those first really high volume intercept marking teams that really played a great form of team defence, where they'd really have that flexibility and freedom respectively to leave their opponents and really sort of come third man in, intercept. It was just a great system and I really enjoyed seeing how that group went. But then of course you had the midfield. So he had Selwood in his very early years, but of course he really came out of the blocks hard. But then the likes of Ablett, Ling, you've got Corey, Kelly, Bartel, of course, was a great midfielder. The likes of Johnson and Chapman were incredible forwards, but again, could push through the midfield. So having those sorts of pieces in there as well, just incredible team and massive respect there. But the All-Australians, so this is a staggering number. So you've had 27 instances of All-Australian players during that 4-year period. So that really speaks to the strength of this Geelong outfit that we had. And again, also we've got sort of that general feel of, if you look at the emergencies, that sort of tells you about the quality and calibre of the team. So being able to leave out the likes of Varco, Lonergan, Hawkins, that really speaks to how strong this team is. And Hawkins, again at this point, he really didn't come into his own, I would say personally, until 2011, where he really had that breakout second half of 2011 and really became a beast of a key forward. And Lonergan as well, so he had a few key years in there, but of course later on really became that incredible key defender that he developed into. So, but at this stage, when you've got the likes of course, Taylor, Scarlett, Harley, it's a bit hard to give him a game. And you could even have a Matthew Egan, who was an All-Australian for that 1 year before he got hurt. So Yeah, and of course getting hurt sort of so late and missing out on ever winning a premiership, that was unfortunate for him. But again, one of a real host of incredible players. So in terms of list talent, this group really ranks up there. And you can see it with this number of All-Australians. But then you look at premierships, only 2. Grand finals, only 3. So that's one of the curious things with this team. But of course, they loved playing at home in Geelong. But maybe at the MCG, while obviously still great, maybe not quite as strong as the likes of, say, a Hawthorn or a Richmond, who we'll come to later, who obviously thrive at the MCG. And then you've got the home and away wins. So you've got most, second most. So incredible there. And you've got the total number of wins. So great number. Unparalleled even, you could say. And then you've got the home and away percentages. So highest, second highest. So the year they were beat, that was in 2009. That was St Kilda, who had that incredible year there. So, and then average percentage. So we've got it right here. So huge percentage, great indicator of strength. So really shows that they're absolute beasts during the home and away season, and just about unbeatable, it felt like, during that period of years. So then you've got Hawthorn. So Hawthorn from 2012 to 2015. So phenomenal team. You can just see with the caliber of the players listed. So in terms of front halves, best front half I've ever seen. So not that Franklin was there for the full span of years, but having the likes of Buddy, Roughhead, Bruce, Gunston, Cyril, all in the same front half, that's absolutely insane. So big reason why that team was so good. But then, of course, you had the kicks, you had the versatility of all these players. So just some incredible dynamics at play. On the outside, Smith, Hill, they both did damage. Of course, on the inside, you had Mitchell. Hodge, he was playing a lot of midfield at that time, but of course you could put him anywhere and he'd take over the game. Sewell, good mid. Lewis, he could play really anywhere, but again, impact. So, and then really strong defense. So, and what's curious about this team is they had a surprisingly low number of All-Australian players, and I would say a lot of them really were snubbed and should have made more All-Australian teams, and a number of them who should have missed out, unfortunately, during those years. So, but I would say that's sort of pretty hard done by. They're a lot better than that number represents, in my opinion. So, premierships 3, grand finals 4. So, the first of those years, they lost the grand final, of course, to Sydney, and then they won the next 3. So, absolutely dominant unit, and one of those teams where if you're a rival team, you're just hoping during that time, gee, I hope they drop off. And it was the same with Geelong in that sort of group of years before that, when they still had Ablett, and they still even won in 2011, the year after, funnily enough. But I do categorize that 2007 team as better than the 2011 team, which is why I chose those 4 years for Geelong's dynasty. But total wins, 67. So incredible stuff. And of course, you've got the home and away wins, equal most, equal most with 2 others, and then equal third most. So you could see towards the end maybe a slight dwindling in terms of that quality, group aging a little bit, but nonetheless incredible. So highest, second highest. And actually the highest percentage in that last year. So there you go. So in that 2015 season, there were really a number of incredible teams then that were competitive with them. But average percentage, so 147. So incredible percentage, and right up there with Geelong. So again, it's that indicator of team strength. So you can tell right away these teams were both really incredible, and they're right up there with one another. So I think we might have a tight finish between those two, for a quick spoiler. And then on to Richmond. So obviously that 4-year period from Richmond, incredible. Looking at them over the last sort of month or two, it's pretty obvious this year's Richmond team isn't up with the 2017 Richmond team. So I think it's pretty fair to assume that Richmond's dynasty is really the 2017 period to 2020 is that best 4-year period. It's fair to say. But of course, with this Richmond team, well, you've got all those pressure forwards, and of course, you've got that rebound from defense. So they've never had an overwhelming midfield, and it's really curious that they've been able to really dominate on such a level without that most overwhelming midfield. But yeah, incredible group. And interesting fact, over those years, I believe it's even 3 of those 4 years, they actually had the highest rate of free kicks against. So being able to win with that rate of free kicks against. Not that free kicks against has necessarily had a high sort of correlation with winning or losing. But nonetheless, curious fact with Richmond that they've had that many free kicks against and they've still been that team, even without the free kicks for ratio being anywhere near favourable. So incredible, really, if you look at that. And their defence has been a real foundation for them. So they've never really had those weak links in defence. So when you've got the likes of Rance, and even after his retirement, they've still held up. Asprey, look, he's dropped off now this year, but again, during that period of years, really good. Grimes, sensational during that period of years. Vlosten, Hooley, Short. You can even add Baker there on the bench. Again, that whole unit, phenomenal. Edwards, really good piece. Got Dusty. So it's really those smalls that really took advantage forward of centre and were those really good ones. So having Martin being able to push forward. Bolton really last year came good. So you've got a lot of good names. Caddy, of course, had that one big year where he was going 2 goals a game and he looked like another Dusty. I'd say he's underutilised now, but I really wanted to give him credit and a nod for at least that one really good year before he's been relegated to playing on a wing and probably not been as good. And then I've got some names here on the bench. So if I'm to look at the star power both on the bench and among the emergencies, I would say certainly compared to the likes of a Geelong or a Hawthorn, it's quite a bit weaker. But what made Richmond so special is their system and their ability to execute really what they were told by the coach and just the incredible buy-in from the group, where they don't necessarily have as much talent or the most overwhelming talent compared to a lot of teams, but they just really put it all together as a group and a unit. So massive respect for what Richmond have achieved as a result and really their ability to dominate over that period of years. Really impressive. So you've got the All-Australians. So you've got 9 instances of All-Australians. So not as many as some of those other teams, but nonetheless a pretty decent outcome. And you could possibly argue that there could have been a few more instances of more All-Australians from this group. Because again, there is enough talent where I could make some arguments for probably a few more than we saw from this group. But premierships, of course, 3. Grand finals, 3. So of course, Collingwood in that 2018 year, well, with Mason Cox really having a career game, really, well, that knocked Richmond out. So, and it could well have been 4 from 4 had that not been the case. So, obviously, incredible team, and they deserve to be on this list with all the others, thoroughly up there. So, home and away wins. So, you've got third most, equal most with 2 others, and third most, and noting 6 games less played. So, total wins 61, but with those less played, you could pretty easily say, okay, it could be about a plus. Let's call it 3 to 4 would be a pretty reasonable assumption they'd get. And you could even edge more towards the 4 range if you wanted. So home and away percentages. So 4th highest, 5th highest, and 4th highest. So interesting indicator and suggests there have actually been teams that have been, at least during the home and away season, very competitive with Richmond. But obviously during the finals, well, they've been getting it done. And of course they love the home crowds at the MCG, but seeing them do it away from home last year made it all the more impressive. So it's definitely a group that's up there. And an interesting thought, but I also wanted to go through what I view as a combined All-Australian team. So obviously we've got Brisbane, Hawthorn, Geelong, Hawthorn, Richmond, Geelong. So a bit of a mix through that back line, and that's all right. Got Brisbane, Hawthorn, Brisbane, Richmond, Hawthorn, Geelong, Richmond, Hawthorn, Hawthorn, Geelong, Geelong, Brisbane. Brisbane, Geelong, Geelong, Hawthorn. So bit of a mix, bit of a combination, but that's what you would expect in putting a best 22 together. Heaps of names you could have apologies to. This is just my personal best 22. So if we're to look at the combined best 22 totals, and look, there's a lot of players that are unlucky to miss, and you could make arguments that each team really has a number of players who have really strong arguments. So it's just come down to personal preference. I don't have specific affinities to particular players or particular teams in this case, but these are just the guys that I came up with that if I was making a best 22, I would put in a team. So, and you can make arguments that each team could have more, but again, Brisbane, love those players. Really, it's out of Geelong and Hawthorn. They've got the most top-end talent. Geelong might be unlucky not to have one more. Hawthorn, it's hard to not include all those guys. So It's just there's an incredible number of great players from all these teams, and these are the most incredible if I'm to create separation there. But yeah, my personal preference only, and I'm sure if you do it at home, you'll have some other mix, and I'm sure there'll be a different combination of mixes, depending on your own personal preferences and who you've liked at the time of watching, of course. But to rank the teams in terms of what they're great at. So all Australian teams. So Geelong, by far and away the most. It's not even close. 9 ahead of Brisbane, 16 ahead of Hawthorn. That's incredible. So more than double Hawthorn, triple Richmond. So that really speaks to how incredible this Geelong team were during the home and away season, where if you're getting that many All-Australian teams, well, you've got the top-end talent, and that was what made Geelong so special. They had the top-end talent like no team we've ever seen, really. So potentially even in the history of the game, you could argue. So really incredible, that top-end talent. But yeah, credit to Brisbane as well. That's phenomenal getting 18 there. And look, Hawthorn pretty unlucky not to have more, and I'd say Richmond as well, pretty unlucky not to have more during those years. But the competition, of course, during those years Richmond have dominated has been a lot more even. So you don't necessarily have those top teams having as much, which is something to note there. So you've got the premierships. So all the teams except Geelong have won 3. So for some, that'll just mean, no, Geelong don't belong in the conversation, and some might claim that, and that's fair enough. Although Geelong did win the year after, so it really extended that dynasty. So credit to them. But for this exercise, I just wanted to take the span of the best 4 years, and Geelong's best 4 years were 2007 through 2010. And whichever year I did either side, it wouldn't have really mattered, but the 2007 team was the stronger team compared to 2011, where, in my opinion, that year Collingwood were, at least during the home and away season, the dominant team. So then you've got the grand finals, of course. So you've only really got the 2 in Brisbane and Hawthorn who have made it to all 4. So those that are all about getting it done during the finals, well, these are the 2 teams that have got it done to the greatest extent during the finals. Richmond, of course, well, they got killed by Mason Cox, so that happened, and that's why they didn't make another. But had Mason Cox not had that game, well, maybe you could have had Richmond go 4 for 4, and maybe that'd have a really unique argument in this conversation. So, and that's the way it goes in the finals sometimes. It's just a best out of one game, and if you have one off game, well, or someone else has a big game on the other team, well, things happen. So, and that's sort of what's happened in that case. So you've got your home and away wins. So Geelong, as I've mentioned before, by far and away the best home and away team. So most wins, 5 clear of Hawthorn. And Hawthorn at 69, that's incredible. So credit to them for that many wins. Here, this component is debatable. And I only say that because Richmond played the 5 less games. So you'd be expecting them, based on the strength of their team, to have won another 3 or 4. So I'll give them ever so slight credit ahead of Brisbane, but you can call that either way. So, and for those who argue Brisbane, look, you can, and that's perfectly fine. But just for the purposes of this exercise, I've just given Richmond the credit there, just because I do believe, had there been 5 more games, that they would have surpassed or at least equaled 64. So you could call them an equal third. Those that do, that's perfectly fine. So home and away percentages. So Geelong only 0.1 ahead of Hawthorn. So it goes to show the strength of those 2 teams, incredible and pretty even. But of course, Geelong being ahead in the home and away wins, the number of All-Australians, you could make the argument they're slightly the better home and away team. But Hawthorn, given they're only that close to Hawthorn, well, yeah, they're really up there too. So Brisbane, quite a bit further back. Richmond, quite a lot further back. But I've mentioned the competition being a lot more even during Richmond's dominant years more recently. So combined best 22 totals. So we've gone Geelong and Hawthorn first with 7 each. And perhaps had Geelong had one more than Hawthorn, maybe in the next part we might have a dead heat. But I've gone Geelong and Hawthorn equal at 7. Some might disagree, that's okay. But this is just what I did. But yeah, from there you've got Brisbane with 5, and then you've got, of course, Richmond at 3. So not quite as strong in terms of that absolute uber top end talent. But of course, Richmond, just they're a great team, great unit. They play together, and that's why they're so great. So placings average. So the lower the better. So how I counted this, you've got, if it's a first place, that's 1 point, second place is 2, third place 3, fourth place 4. So pretty self-explanatory. So Hawthorn came out in first by 1 point ahead of Geelong. And given they were that close, well, it really goes to show that those two teams, at least for mine, are the top 2 dynasties we've seen in this last 20 years. From there on, you've got Brisbane in third at 14, and then you've got Richmond further back at 19. So, but my verdict, the most dominant team, for me, that's Geelong. So having that level of overwhelming All-Australian talent, that is really incredible. So when you have the highest percentage, most wins, most All-Australians, and that most All-Australians by such a large margin, and even having quite substantial separation in terms of wins, well, that really speaks to how dominant that Geelong team was. And the other thing with Geelong as well, they did it before you've really had the competition become a little more diluted, in that in the years following on from that Geelong dynasty, well, of course, you had the introductions of Geelong and GWS that, at least for those early years, made life easier for some of those teams. So really having that level of talent on the one team during that time is really incredible. So best list, again, I'm giving it to Geelong. Just their best 22 on paper, if I can have any group. I really like their whole group as a collective. So again, personal opinion. Others will disagree, and that's completely fine. So you've got the most dominant if they were all to play today. So for me, that's probably Hawthorn. So although I like Geelong's list on paper, I just can't help but sort of prefer how Hawthorn would go today. Obviously, understanding the more modern structures, modern defences, how to set up behind the ball, I just feel like Hawthorn would be slightly better off. Of course, more forward pressure with the Geelong team, not necessarily as renowned for that, though very strong nonetheless during their time, but just not quite up to that modern standard in that respect. So just knowing the modern game more and being able to structure up better for the modern game, I do like how Hawthorn would present slightly more. But again, judgment call, others will disagree, and that's completely fine. The team I'd back for a finals series, I'd go Hawthorn. And of course, you've got the home ground advantage at the MCG, and if I was to identify anything, that's probably where I would give Hawthorn the edge, where I just prefer Hawthorn at the MCG a little more than I do Geelong. So, but maybe on a neutral territory, maybe I'd be heading a bit more in Geelong's direction. But yeah, if it's a finals series and you're playing every game at the MCG as opposed to in Geelong, well, yeah, Hawthorn ever so slightly. And you've got, of course, you've got the grand finals, one more than Geelong. You've got the premierships, of course, one more than Geelong. So just based on that success, you do have to go Hawthorn. So, yeah, hopefully that's not sitting on the fence for any of you guys and really sort of identifying, depending on what the argument is, this is the best team. Thanks for watching, guys, and let me know in the comments section below which team had the greatest dynasty. Could be any of them. I want to know your thoughts. Which team and why? Anyway, if you've watched to the end, make sure you give a like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell if you haven't already, and see you in the next video.